there were a number of women caught pretending to be men at sea during this era, so I would not be surprised if there weren't some women pirates who just went undiscovered. They would probably have gone to sea as men and just never discovered. And that would be fascinating to find some good information on that. But I haven't come across. And a lot of the women who are named during this period as pirates either were not pirates or didn't exist. I mean, you can't go up to a popular website that lists women pirates because you can start striking, every other one probably off the list. I understand the need to want to identify women pirates, and I actually believe that there were probably quite a few that we don't know about. But unfortunately, there's been some bad scholarship in a lot of ways. I'll try to think of her name, Jacquot de la Haye, or however you want to call her. I still argue with people today. She was created by a French writer in the 1940s, but you'll find her listed in books and websites as this 1650s female pirate on Tortuga.
Interesting.
And this being the internet age, people will not take your word for it. You say, well, show me the documentation. Well, it's on the internet. It must be true.
Must be.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Before the golden age, there were just like a couple that I can think of. There was Grace O'Malley, and there was in antiquity, and I don't know how to actually pronounce her name. It was a Queen Tuta or something like that. She, I think her husband was a pirate, and then he died, and then she kind of took over everything. And then Polybius basically just said what boils down to the modern equivalent of that bitch was always on the rag.
Okay.
Oh. Well, he didn't hold back.
That's what Polybius said about her. Yeah, that's what Polybius said.
Awesome.
But yeah, she was fairly successful.
Okay, so when pirates would be out on the sea, did they just pillage anything they came across, all the ships, or did they have specific people they wouldn't go after, or how that works?
This kind of gets into the area of are they privateers or legitimate pirates? You have buccaneers, late 17th century, were kind of quasi-pirates. Often they didn't have lawful commissions. They kind of had a wink and a nod. And they were mostly going after the Spanish, although occasionally they might, take a Dutch or a Portuguese ship, which was, strictly speaking, piracy. It also need to probably move away from the notion that pirates just kind of roamed the ocean blue looking for prey. They basically stayed in the channels where they knew there would be trade, along coastlines. They were good at collecting intelligence, and the idea was to intimidate your prey and to surrender without a fight, plunder it. And again, as Lorence knows well, you could run a long series on this, even in just the golden age, from let's say 1655 to 1725 or 30. I mean, you could do 50 episodes, and over that time, just see the gradual changes, in types of piracy, tactics. They're all small, subtle divisions, but from the beginning to the end of that, you can actually see a cultural shift just over that 50, 60, 75 years.
Did they fight countries' navies also? Or
that's kind of a myth that's
them?
grown. Generally, they wanted to avoid men of war. Late 17th century, you would find some buccaneers, or French filibusters, same thing, basically, engaging Spanish men of war. And you did find some English. England had a strong navy back then that were, sorry, I'm dealing with a cat over here, a 16-pound cat. And the English were concerned about their strength. They had, late 17th century, these buccaneers were very, they had quite a bit of military prowess. A lot of them had been former soldiers. They'd grown up in the military, kind of an atmosphere. They were considered themselves quasi-sea and land warriors. They would attack and sack towns and cities as well as take prey at sea. But by the early 18th century, you're pretty much seeing privateers who are basically seamen alone and not attacking anybody ashore anymore. And by the early 18th century, and I hate saying it as much as we glorify Blackbeard and all these guys pretty much ran from men of war because they were I have documented this well, and I've had readers who just refuse to believe it. It's like you've crushed their heroes or something. But I know Blackbeard had a glorious end, but basically he fired a couple broadsides at some English naval volunteers who were coming after him in small local sloops with no protection, and he ran, and he fought basically because he had to. Bartholomew Roberts, that everybody holds up to be one of the greatest pirates of the era, his consort ran when confronted by an English man of war, and that man of war just, took the guy down very quickly. Same thing happened to Roberts. And part of that is because professional navies were designed to close with an enemy and kill them. But by the early 18th century, pirates were basically out there. They're like, I compare a lot of the 18th century pirates to Somali pirates. Go out and intimidate merchantmen, steal, rob their cargoes, and run like hell from men of war, because the professionals are probably going to kill you.
Yeah.
It turned out bad
question
every time. Somali pirates. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Well, with the Somali thing, I have that written down because when you say pirate, I think people get kind of like what you were alluding to. There's a grandiose sense of, I don't want to say hero, but it's almost like an admiration for what a pirate was. With us looking back, like that's really cool. Even though what they were doing is effectively the same as what we deal with today with Somali pirates, but you wouldn't hear anybody, I don't think, say, all the Somali pirates, that's really cool. You know what I mean? Like they have parallel reasons for why they do what they do, but what separates them apart, or why does you feel differently about one group and not the other?
It's cultural, basically, and there may be a certain racial aspect to it as well. I think Lorence touched on this well earlier, and this is something I wrote a book, Pirate Hunting, that is really written from the point of view of pirate hunters and their victims. It's history of piracy from that point of view. And Lorence touched on it earlier when he said that for the victim, it doesn't matter. We glorify pirates today, but if you read some of the Spanish records, accounts of victims of the sack of Veracruz, from the Buccaneer side, it looks like this glorious episode of, buccaneering. And Disney has an entire ride devoted to it. That is, ignore the movies. That ride is originally basically buccaneers sacking a Spanish town. They are torturing people. I love the ride, but, I put it in a proper cultural context. But when you read the Spanish accounts of what was going on during this, you really want to side with the Spaniards. And I know, Spain did a lot of things that are, they brutalized the New World, and then they were being brutalized. But, it's hard to defend rape and, children stuffed into a church and starving to death and, all kinds of things like that. So, anyway, going back to your question, Lorence, I'm sure has a good perspective on this as well. It may be different. It's really cultural. Nobody wants to look at Somali pirates. Oh, that's a bunch of those Africans with guns, thugs, which, you could apply that same definition to the early 18th century pirates, or probably just about any, thugs with guns. It's as far as the romantic aspect, I'm more inclined to prefer the Buccaneers, because at least often the people they were attacking had pretty stout defenses, were willing to attempt to defend, But if you're a pirate, you're running around and your only prey is like the Somalis, you're going to go point guns at people who don't have guns. And you will notice, by the way, that as soon as merchantmen started arming, Somali pirates never took an armed ship.
Yep. That makes sense.
I personally haven't done a lot of research on Somali pirates. I have a book on it, but I haven't gotten to it yet. But at least from my point of view, I especially like the tactics, like the mindset of not modern pirates, but all other pirates. I like, while yes, what they were doing was terrible, absolutely. I think that there's a certain cleverness in some of the in like the way they did things that I think is really interesting. And I'm not sure if that exists currently with Somali pirates.
I think it
Their
has a lot to
tactics
do
are
with the time period. You know, like we tend to romanticize that time period. You know, the Victorian, Elizabethan eras. Everything about those we romanticize and in every way. And I think that when you look at those big magnificent ships they would build, the large sails, the elaborate outfits, there's just something about that I think that is missing. Now, if the Somalis went and built a large wooden ship and put on velvet robes and walked around with a hook on their hand, I think we could regain the traction for pirates again. I believe we could make pirates great again. Okay, so that brings me to what I had on my list next, which was those three things: the peg leg, the eye patch, and the hook. Why are those things associated with pirates? Was there actually pirates that walked around with peg legs and hooks for hands?
a few maybe, but you can't do a lot. There's Johnson references one, but basically it's if you got your legs shot off, you ended up with seamen were commonly discharged with wooden legs. You know, you could become a cook. You might be some kind of a sea artist, but there's not a lot you can do once you lose your leg. Basically made you a cripple, as they would have termed it back then. But it looks good for Hollywood. Hollywood is seized on these things. If you want to really see a good origin of a lot of these modern myths, go look at Douglas Fairbanks and the Black Pirate. It's a great film. It's beautifully shot. The scenes look almost like paintings, but it's probably got most of the stereotypes. Eye patches. There were eye patches too, but that's meant that you lost an eye. It wasn't anything having to do with piracy. It was just you lost an eye in battle or from disease. You know, civilians wore them. You know, gentlemen wore them. You know, common workers wore them. It was again. This goes back to a whole lot of our ideas of piracy are really maritime or just have been generically ascribed. They look cool. They're a way to distinguish and create a caricature, basically. I don't remember who wrote that, but somebody, and maybe Lorence can recall who wrote it, but it pointed out that our modern idea of the pirates is basically a caricature, and we've sanitized them so much it made them almost childlike, so they're not frightening anymore. You know, they're things you tell kids about. I think I actually stories.
I think I actually do remember who wrote that. It was in the book X Marks the Spot. It's about the archaeology of piracy, and it was in the introduction. Actually, yeah, it was. I think Sherwood was the author. Yeah, I think it was in there. I remember.
I have it. Yeah, I'm about 50 feet from my library, so I'm not getting up. But it's a very good book.
I was actually
factually oriented too.
Go ahead.
No, that's okay. I was just saying that don't forget what you're going to say. I'll take 30 seconds on this.
Okay.
You can basically break down researchers probably in any field into two sorts. There are those who are strictly fact-oriented, and then there are the ideologues. And I'm not saying ideologues can't do good work, but they always tend to be biased toward their ideology. And that could be a Marxist or a capitalist or pirates were just really cool, awesome dudes, whatever that ideology is. But X Marks the Spot is excellent because, archaeologists, cartographers, there's some cartographers who've written some excellent.
Did we lose him?
Did he walk the plank?
I thought you lost me for a second.
Oh no, he walked the plank.
I just have to pop back in. You probably, yeah. Might have lost his signal. He can use that same link to come back in.
And did you hear that?
I'll let him know.
There he is.
Oh, he's back.
Did you hear the screen locked up and it's been doing that occasionally. So I don't know how much of that you heard and how much you didn't hear.
We got about half of it.
About half of it. Anyway, real simple. People who have to deal primarily with facts, like cartographers and such, they tend to write very good, rigorous works on piracy because they want names, dates, places, and proof. And ideologues tend to be a little bit softer when it comes to proof. Whatever basically they can cherry pick to fit theirs.